Well, hello, you guys. It's me, Queen Renee, once again, coming in with another story time. This story time is actually going to be about my second son's father and how I ended up being with this man for 4 years off and on. And how I got involved with this man who was at the time married, and actually married to someone that I knew and I had known since I was probably about 12 or 13, but I never knew that he was her husband until he and I started messing around. So, we're going to go ahead and jump on into it. This is going to be the third time that I've made this video. Hopefully this time I can get through it and get it posted before somebody interrupts this video. And for whatever reason, when it stops the video, it doesn't save it. So, when I was 18, if you've watched the previous video about my first son's father, when I was 18 years old, I met a guy at a bar. I had went out with my dad one night, and I met a guy at a bar, and I actually thought he was gorgeous, and so my cousin introduced me to him. At the time that when I met him, I asked him how old he was, and he was like 37, because I was 18, so he would have had to been 37. He's actually the same age as my mom. He's just a few months younger than her. And he told me his age. He told me that he worked at Chrysler. And I thought, man, this guy, he's this fine, got a good job, work at Chrysler, and his age, and he's not married. And I asked him, I said, you're all of these things and you're not married? And he said, no, I'm not married. I like to spend my money on myself. So I was like, okay, well, I started talking to this guy that night, and only reason I really actually talked to him in the first place was because I thought he was really fine, and I just wanted to see if I could get him to talk to me. So ended up my dad ended up going home, and my cousin was like, oh, I'll get her home. And she ended up leaving and asking him, would he give me a ride home? So he said, yeah. And I have advised him that, I needed to go pick up my son. He's like, oh, okay, that's not a problem or whatever. So we went to pick up my son, and when we came out, my son was in a carrier. My son was only like 2 months old. And so he informed me that he didn't think it was going to work between him and I, because I had just had a baby. And he was like, you'll probably end up going back with that dad or whatever. And I was like, nah, I don't think that's going to happen. But it actually did happen. I ended up back with my baby's dad. But later on, a year after, on my son's first birthday, my cousin came from Malden, my cousin Jean, and who was my favorite cousin. and God rest his soul. So he had came to Beloit, and he's like, he asked me, did I want to go out? And I was like, yeah. So we ended up going to the club, and when I walked in, I saw him sitting at a table. And I didn't say anything to him. I just walked past because I figured, he probably didn't even remember who I was or whatever. So me and my cousin sitting at the table, and he goes by to, he went on the dance floor with some chick, and then as he's going back to his table, he stops and he asks me, he was like, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm fine, how are you? And he's like, I'm good. And he asked me, was my cousin my boyfriend? And I was like, no, that's my cousin. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, he was like, well, you want to dance? And I was like, sure. So me and him went to dance. And then after that, he's like, you want to get together tomorrow and hang out or whatever? And I said, yeah. I said, sure. But I was like, I have to, I won't have a babysitter tomorrow because I used my babysitter tonight. So he was like, oh, okay, no problem. You can bring the baby with you. We just gonna hang out at my house or whatever. And I was like, all right, cool. So he came and picked me up. And when he picked me up, and we were driving and we went across town, and when we got across town, um, we turned on this street named Harvey. And when we turned on that street, I just began to get this eerie feeling like in the pit of my stomach. And I was just like, where does he live on this street, right? Like, why are we on this street? I knew one person that lived on that street. And then as we're getting closer to the house, I'm like thinking in my head, and I'm like, oh my God, don't turn in this driveway. Don't turn this driveway. Well, he ends up turning in the driveway. And when he turned in the driveway, I'm like, oh my God. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe she moved. Maybe she moved. Because I hadn't been to the house I hadn't been there in years. Um, since I was a little girl, maybe about 13 or so. And so we went in the house, and when we went in the house looked the same. And I was like, shoot. I was like, yeah, okay. So I knew his wife, and I'd known his wife since I was probably about 12 years old or so, because my aunt has a baby with her son. I had never met him. I knew that she was married, but I never knew who her husband was. And the name that my cousin introduced me to him as is not the name that I knew her husband's name to be, or what they called him. So I asked him, I said, when last year when I met you, when I asked you, were you married? Why'd you lie? And he told me, oh, I didn't lie. And I said, yeah, you did. You told me you weren't married. And he said, oh, I never told you that. I never told you that. And I said, yes, you did. I specifically asked you, and you told me you weren't married. And he said, no, I didn't tell you that, but it don't matter. Me and my wife, we got to understand it. Well, we all know about them understandings. So that particular night, we were going to be intimate. We didn't get to do that because his wife came home, and he heard her pull in the driveway. And so I ducked out the back, and he came around like a couple minutes later and picked me and my son up. And as we're going, he's driving me to my house, and I was like, oh my God, I left my purse, my baby bottle, and a diaper on the floor in front of your couch. And he was like, oh, okay, okay. He was like, I'm gonna go back and get them. He was like, and then I'll bring it back over here. Don't worry about it. I can explain that away. And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, how the heck can you explain that away? A woman's purse, a baby bottle, and a diaper just sitting in her house, and you're going to explain that away. So he, true form, he came back to the house, and he had my purse and my stuff, and he dropped it off. Needless to say, that was the first of many encounters that he and I had over the course of 4 years. I ended up getting pregnant by him in on New Year's Eve. So I think she was out of town or something, and we ended up, supposedly we were gonna spend New Year's Eve together, but after the act of intimacy, he informed me that he had to, how the story goes is he had to go and pick up a Uzi he was buying from somebody that night. And he was gonna go pick it up. He collect weaponry or whatever. So he has guns and knives and swords and all that kind of stuff. So he said he had to go pick up this Uzi, and that where he was going in Rockford, that it was like this park that's known for not being a good area or whatever. And he didn't want to take me with him. And so he was going to drop me off at my sister's house, and then he would come back and pick me up when he got back to Beloit. Needless to say, he never came back to pick me up. I didn't hear from him, I don't know, for a few days or whatever. But that's kind of how our relationship was. He just was just kind of in and out. And after a while, I realized that we didn't have, like, we weren't boyfriend and girlfriend, so to speak. We didn't have this real relationship, that we were just, I was just his side chick, and we were just having sex. He wanted to pretend like our relationship was more than that. When we were together, he always wanted to tell me how he loved me, and how we were going to be a family, me, him, and our kids, my kids, and everything. And his wife ended up finding out that I was pregnant by him. She found out, who I was, because this chick saw me and him at the bar, and she called my aunt and told my aunt about it. And then I think my aunt called her and told her that him and I were sleeping together, or were together, or something. And it was just, a bunch of mess. But anyway, so once I ended up pregnant, I used to just do stuff, just mean spirited things, like walking past her house, big and pregnant, knowing she knows that I'm sleeping with her husband, and that I think she knew then by then that I was pregnant by him. Um, and how everybody found out I was pregnant, because when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't tell anybody except for my cousin, and my parents knew. But nobody else really knew. So one night we were gonna go to we were supposed to go to the movies. We were supposed to go to see The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. And I had wanted to see that movie really bad. And my cousin was like, okay, we can go to the movies, but she was saying how she wanted to go to these. And I said, well, if we go to the movies, then we're not going to be able to get into these because they're going to start carding. And we're going to be too late. It's going to be too many people in there, so they're going to start carding. Because we were underage and had no business in there. We were 19. So I was like, so, let's forget it. We won't go to the movies. To, we'll just go to the club. So we get to the club, and we're at the club and everything. And my, my oldest son's father ended up being there that night. And he just was, bothering me all night, in my face, and talking to me, and I was just like, get away from me or whatever. So there was an altercation in the bathroom, in the men's bathroom, and then all of a sudden, I guess shots were fired. They came out of the bathroom and shots were fired, and 3 people ended up getting shot that night. And one of those people was myself. So I ended up getting shot 2 times. I got shot in the back and I got shot in the leg. So my that's how I ended up finding out that he was even in the bar that night. I hadn't seen him all night. I hadn't seen nor talked to him. I didn't even know he was there until after I had got shot. And he ended up being like by me or whatever, and he was talking to my cousin, trying to tell her that he was to tell me that he was going to meet me that he was going to go to the hospital. I'm taping right now. What do you want? Aren't you hungry? Don't you want to buy us food? No, I'm not eating today. So so he said so anyway, he was going to meet us at the hospital, and she was like, she can hear you, she can, you can talk to her, she can hear you. So she's like, you do know she pregnant? And he's like, he looked at her and he was like, keep that under your hat. Like, and I'm like, oh my God. So that's how he found out I was pregnant. And then they announced it on the news that 19-year-old Regina Brooks was shot in Dee's Den, and 19-year-old pregnant Regina Brooks. And that's how everybody found out I was pregnant. But nobody really knew I was pregnant by him, because nobody really knew that we were together. So fast forward, I had my son, and we dealt with each other for off and on, like I said, for 4 years. He was always nice. Like he never was mean or anything to me. He never, to this day, he's never raised his voice at me. But he was a liar. And I don't know how I thought that it would be any different than that. But he fed me a lot of lies, And I finally came to the realization that we were never going to be a family, and we were never going to honestly be together. Um, I kind of knew that, but I just kind of just was letting it, um, letting, just kind of trying to wait it out, I guess. And then I found out that he had gotten a divorce. And the interesting thing with that is that my friend told me about it. She called me up and told me, she was like, "Did you know that they got a divorce? Da 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 da." And I was like, no, I did not. So I actually tracked him down because he had moved out of her house. And I tracked him down and I was like, "So you got a divorce and you didn't even tell me?" And he's like, "Well, I knew you were going to find out. Um, I knew you'd find out, da 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 da." And I was like, "That is beside the point. How, how are you? We're supposed to be in this whole relationship and you talking about you gonna marry me and da 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 da. But you finally get a divorce and you don't even tell me." So that's when I knew for a fact. I knew we would never be anything more than me just a side piece. And all those dreams and all those lies and things that he was feeding me was just that, a pack of lies. So I ended up moving. I moved to Minnesota, and when I moved to Minnesota, I didn't tell him I was going. I I spent one last night with him, specifically because I knew I was leaving. Like, I think we were leaving like a couple days later or whatever. And this particular night, when he came over, when we had been intimate and when we were done, I was like, "Okay, you can go now." And he's like, "Go now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was like, "You got what you came for. You can go home now." And he's like, "Oh, I was going to spend the night." And I was like, "For what? You ain't never spent the night with me." The only time I think we ever spent overnight together is we got trapped. We got caught at a hotel one night during an ice storm. And so we couldn't drive. We couldn't leave out of there because the streets were just, it was really bad. So that's the only time we had ever spent an entire night together in out of 4 years. And so he was saying he was going to spend the night, and I'm like, "For what? You ain't never spent the night before, so why start now?" You might as well go on and go home. So because that by this time I was pretty much over him and the bull. Um, so I had come to the realization also that he never really showed any interest in my son. Um, the only interest he ever showed in my kid was when he came to the hospital to see my son after he was born, and he was like, "Wow, he looks just like me. He looks like I spit him out myself." And I was like, "Yeah, he does." And he's like, um, open your eyes, because he wanted to see if he had like hazel or gray eyes or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, "Dude, your eyes ain't gray. Your eyes are, those are contacts you have in your eyes. What are you talking about?" So, but anywho, so I after I moved, he just really never, he didn't, he lied a lot to my kid. Told him he was going to do stuff, but he never kept his promises to my son. And my son really just doesn't have too much dealings with him. I've tried over the years to make it where they would have interactions and be able to spend time together and things like that. But it was never anything that he did on his own accord. He never actually made any effort to have any dealings with my son. And so at this point, he's older now. He's what, 60? He'll be 67. No, he'll be 60. What, I'll be 48. No, yeah, I'll be 48. So that means he'll be 47 this year. Um so I mean, I'll be 48, so he'll be 67 this year. And now that he's older and he's in church and everything, he wants to pretend like nothing, like everything has always been hunky-dory with him and his children. And he has lots of children. He has approximately a total of 20, like 22, maybe 21 children, something like that. He's got a lot of kids. But a lot of his kids don't really deal with him either. Some do, but a lot of his kids really just don't have too much dealings to with him, and he seems to not understand why. He posts things on his Facebook saying that he doesn't understand why his daughter doesn't want to deal with him or his son doesn't want to deal with him and things like that. But just because you feel like you're a changed person and you're different and you've grown up and now you're in church and everything doesn't mean that those kids don't still have that hurt. And the sense of abandonment from their father. And they're not, they don't, they're not forgiven of that. My son never met his grandparents on that side. And I honestly I never heard him speak of his father ever. And then just, I think last year, he posted a picture on Facebook of his father. I was flabbergasted because I just assumed his father had passed away or something something of that nature. I didn't know. His mother, before his mother passed away, he never introduced my son to, to meet either one of them, which is weird to me. That you don't want your child to know your family at all. I think my son met his Aunt Pam before she passed away, before years ago or whatever. But like he knows a couple of his brothers. He's met a couple of his brothers, and that's it. But he has a plethora of other siblings in this world that he doesn't know, and it's a shame. But I digress. So I spent 16 years after the initial 4, I spent 16 years of my life being in love with this man. Or maybe I should say 16 years altogether. I don't know. But loving this man that didn't care, didn't give a good goddamn about me. Um, we even tried to get back together later. Like 16 years later, we tried to get back together, and he asked me to marry him and all of that good stuff. And my dumb behind said, yeah. But it was it was all a ruse. It wasn't about nothing. It was just him trying to say what I guess saying whatever he thought he needed to say to get me in the bed. I don't know. Just, and you would think by that time I would have been smart enough to say no to him. But I still had un I still had unresolved feelings for this person, who I'd been in love with since I was 18 years old. So anyway, needless to say, that didn't work out, because as soon as I went back home to Minnesota, he wasn't answering texts. He wasn't answering calls. He would call and we would only talk for a couple minutes. You know, that kind of bull crap. So I was like, here we go. He ain't changed. Ain't changed a bit. So I cut that short, and then that was the end of that. It just, he was a trickster. He was a liar. Point blank, period. He just was a liar. And I hope that he's changed. And I hope that he makes his wife that he's married to now, I hope that he makes her happy, or that he's a better person. But he just was not marriage material. And that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Like I said, he never was abusive to me physically, but I felt that he was mentally abusive to me, and manipulative. And but that is what it is. So I hope you enjoyed the story. I will have another story time for you. And this, like I said, this is a series of story times that I'm doing about the men that I've had in my life up until now. So if you like, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.